Hi, and welcome to Exponential Next Church Expressions Next series. 7 conversations exploring the most common church expressions in the USA as of right now, as we're recording this and as you're listening. I'm Carrie Williams, the Executive Director of Exponential Next, and I'm really, really glad that you're here. And I want to introduce you to my co host in case you don't know him. Bill, introduce yourself, friend.
Hi, Carrie. My name is Bill Kokenar. I serve as the Director of Deployment for Exponential, which means I get to provide strategic and operational oversight to our learning communities and some of the other R&D opportunities that we have. And it also means I get to work with Carrie in Next Expression. So good to be with you, Carrie.
Thanks, Bill. If you guys don't know Bill and you're listening in, let me just tell you, I get to work with the best people on the face of the earth, and Bill happens to be one of them. Um, but today's episode, we also have some more of my favorite people and friends on mission that we get to interview. And these guys are part of the exponential family, I would say. They have the multiplication DNA running in their blood and teach us new things about multiplication every day. And so we're really grateful for them. In today's series, we are talking about, in this episode specifically, microchurch planting and what that means. Our guests are planting churches throughout Kansas City through KC Underground or Kansas City Underground. With us, we have Brian Johnson and Rob Wagner. And if you guys could just take a few minutes and introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about your origin story, like how did you get to where you are today? Let people get to know you for a moment.
Go ahead, Brian. You go first, man.
Oh, I was so close to saying, go ahead, Rob. I am Brian. I live here in Kansas City, as you mentioned, married to Kristen. We have 5 kids between 13 and 7. So life is pretty busy right now. Yeah, and I get to help direct the Kansas City Underground as one of the roles that I do. So mainly I'm working with what we call hub directors across our city, supporting them as they support disciple making and microchurch leaders, just considering listening what is it that they would need to be most effective in that work, and also helping build some systems and structures behind the scenes to help support our network as it multiplies.
I'm Rob. Grew up in the Chicagoland area, and then that's where I met my wife, Michelle. And we I had a crush on her all through high school. She's dating another guy. But when they broke up, I swooped in and it worked out great for me. And
Nice.
we, after college and university, we helped with the church plant that was in South Bend, Indiana, and that was a pretty wild ride. That was a church plant that was very innovative for the time. I always affectionately call it a Willowback model. So Willow Creek and Saddleback were big influences. But it was real early on in that kind of seeker-friendly movement. So what we were doing was seen as really weird. People didn't know if it was a cult or something strange. We met in a movie theater. We used the arts, and we met in like 17 different rented facilities in the first 10 years. So Michelle and I always joke that we probably have the record for the most chairs set up and taken down. And it really felt like a miracle in a cornfield. You know, we're out in this town, about 46,000 Granger, and we saw a lot of genuinely like lost people meeting Jesus. Like Christians weren't interested in what we were doing. I think a lot of them thought it was irreligious. And then those freshly redeemed people kept bringing their friends. And it really felt like, to me, I'd never been in a church like that, where we were just baptizing people every year. They were meeting Jesus. And it ended up becoming a very large church. And so we never had set out to be a mega church, but we became a mega church. And the first 10 years of that was, like I said, like this amazing rocket ship ride. And then the second 10 years of that became like more and more like attention. Michelle and I always had a passion for global missions because of the person who discipled us, our youth pastor. And because of another mentor, fell into what became actually a genuine disciple making movement that became a church planting movement in South India that we were very deeply involved in. And that was like a game changer, because it was like, oh man, this is the 7-course feast. This is like walking around the book of Acts. I love the way God's been working through this church growth thing, but it's also got a very dark side. It's creating like consumers. We're not seeing a lot of multi-generational disciple making, let alone people just being active disciples. It's very programmatic. It's very centralized. And then I started waking up to this whole idea of like, the whole city needs to be filled with the gospel, not just people coming on a weekend service. And then that led to this whole journey that eventually led to Kansas City Underground. And so we moved to Kansas City about 11 years ago, and Brian and I became great buddies because he was in a kind of a large predominant model church too, feeling the same discontent. And we were given permission in those churches to run like these cool experiments, parallel pathways, R&D kind of stuff. And so we were sharing notes, and then we both ended up at the same large church here in Kansas City. And then out of that sort of kind of pioneering work inside of that large church, the Underground was born and emerged. And so same thing with Brian as me, like we're at this point spend a lot of our time serving the hub leaders, who are these like equipping servants that are equipping the decentralized networks of disciple makers and microchurches around the city. And it's a privilege and an honor and a joy to watch ordinary people planting themselves among unreached pockets of people, planting the gospel, making new disciples, and seeing microchurches, new extended spiritual families emerge from that.
Yeah, I asked you something. I hadn't planned on asking you this, but it occurred to me. I think it would be appropriate. You talked a little bit about India and the impact there. If you could share the story about when you came back and it was Volunteer Sunday,
Mm.
and your impressions in coming from India and what you were experiencing there and the Volunteer Sunday, and then I do want to get to the church where you guys were at and how that kind of even helped KC Underground birth.
Yeah, it was probably 5-6 years into what began with, there was about 7 different like indigenous leaders, and they all had their own little networks of 5 or 6. I didn't have the language at the time, but microchurches. And from the mega church pastor perspective, I'm like, oh, they all have 5 or 6 small groups. That's cool.
Yeah.
Like we have scores of small groups, you know what I mean? But I didn't see them as full churches really yet. Totally. Even though they were calling them churches, I was like, they're like 10 or 20 people, you know what I mean? But it's cool. It's great. I'm excited about this. I want to learn about it. But by year 5 or 6, it was like I had been completely converted. I was like, oh, these are all full expressions of the church. They're being led by ordinary people. It's like completely happening out of lostness. They're finding people of peace, these gospel spreading through relational networks. And one of those people and we would spend extended time there, like sometimes up to a month. Like we'd go over with our family and stay. So we had real friendships, you know what I mean? And one of those people was a woman named Martha that we really fell in love with. And Martha was a stay-at-home mom, and she lived in a large town that's on the interstate. So there's a lot of sex trafficking, a lot of prostitution in that town because of the trucking industry. And God really gave her a burden for the women that were working in that industry. And so she began to overlap her life more and more with theirs, which, for example, she would shop where in the market they would shop, which led to daily encounters because shopping is a daily thing there. And she eventually became friends with a woman who was a person of peace, a kind of like a mother among the prostitutes. And doing Discovery Bible studies, she gave her life to Christ, and then it went viral among those women and then their children. And over about a year and a half, it became a network of 3 microchurches. And then they started pulling their funds, and they started a seamstress and tailoring business so they could get out of the sex trafficking industry. And it just was this amazing story. Like she would send her kids to school during the day, and then she was a network leader of this network of microchurches and running a business. And it was like, this is phenomenal. And and at the end of one of those trips, came back, and I was preaching that weekend. And I remember the series was Stomp. You guys know Stomp, but the boom, 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 boom. And we were like, everybody's got to stomp. And it was all about like find a slot to volunteer, and volunteerism. I'm grateful for the volunteerism movement because it can be a very meaningful step in people getting up out of their seats into the story. But when volunteerism dead ends into like ministry equals a couple hours a month serving in a slot in a program inside the church, then it domesticates God's people. And let's be honest, that is the majority of what happens in the predominant model church. It isn't one step in a larger process of helping people become spiritual mothers and fathers that develop their own multi-generational disciple making. And I was preaching that weekend. And after the first service, I went backstage and I wept because I was like, if Martha was in our congregation here, she would never become a leader of a network of microchurches starting her own business. She would come to this weekend service and volunteer and probably become a small group leader, and that'd be it. Because we don't have a pathway beyond that. Or she'd volunteer in the children's ministry. That'd be it.
Yeah.
And I wept. I was like, there wasn't my intention. I've inherited a model that I've not questioned enough. And I no more. Like I'm giving the rest of my life to make sure that every Martha that I encounter going forward can become who they meant to be. And that was like, almost 20 years ago now. And man, now we literally serve Marthas all day, every day.
Yeah.
And it is the most joyful, wonderful, difficult, challenging, like never going back assignment, and
appreciate you sharing that. Brian, you're a similar kind of experience before you guys met.
Yeah, I had experience overseas, not to the degree that Rob did, but for sure, I would say for most of the underground directors, especially in the beginning, we would say we had this encounter with Jesus in the majority world, global South, that was like, okay, we're experiencing something that is just not the same when we go home, which you hear that a lot, but then it's like, what does that mean for us? Um, how do we capture what we're experiencing and release that same power? We call the experience that Rob had in that moment, we call that our second conversion moment. We stole that from Hugh Halter. It's like we have this first conversion moment where we experience Jesus. We know we want to give our life to him. And it seems like in this, I don't want to just use the term missional paradigm because I think it gets overused and probably a lot of misunderstanding and baggage around that. But in this paradigm in which we exist, we find so many leaders that you just have to have that second conversion moment where you go, okay, but what does this all mean? What does it require of me? Mine was on the driveway of this guy that lived next door to me. He was the only neighbor I knew. Um, I was working for a church in a college town. And this is like right after our first son was born. And we were just walking around the neighborhood doing this little loop, and he called us into the driveway. And we stood there and talked for a little bit, hanging out. And he asked me about the neighbor across the street, who was an elderly woman. And he just said, "Hey, did you know her mom passed away?"
Hmm.
And I was like, I didn't even know this woman's mom was still alive. Like I thought, no way. Uh, anyway, he saw my discomfort and he just like sort of I don't have a filter. I'm just going to ask you this question. You don't even know her name, do you? And I was like, nope. And he said, man, that's the problem with you Christians. You make loving people a job.
Hmm.
That was like the moment for me of, oh, I've done exactly that. I've equated this role in this church as like, yeah, this is enough. Jesus will be proud of me for this.
Hmm.
Discounting all of the people that show up in this building that don't have that role, and not only not training them just to begin with who's your neighbor and what's their name, but not embodying that as well. So that was like what set us off on as a family on a new journey to say, okay, we're going to join Jesus and what he's called us to do. And it starts with just asking the name of our neighbor.
Yeah.
Mm. Amen.
Yeah. Appreciate you guys sharing that. Honestly, we hadn't planned on starting this way, but just Rob, you're mentioning about India and remembering that story. And it's interesting, the idea of talking about a second conversion. Um, Yeah, we do see that. So you guys are together now. You're at a church. You're beginning to like, what did those early days look like? And then what did, kind of just talk a little bit about the birth and evolution of the KC Underground.
Yeah, I'll start it and then I'll pass it off to Rob because he framed it as we found ourselves at this church together. But to be clear, I only found myself there because Rob said, "Hey, I have a job for you." So I didn't just move to Kansas City because I thought it'd be fun. Um, yeah, 10 years ago, actually, just a couple of days ago, our family made the trek across the country with very small children.
Mhm.
And they were the only family we knew. So we moved in a couple miles away, like, oh, we got to be close to somebody. Um, I was in actually in Auburn, Alabama, and we were, as a family, beginning to work on this idea of how do we multiply disciples? How do we think that way? Um, and how do we do that actually in our relational networks in which we exist rather than inviting people out of those spaces? And we had 6 or 8 people that we were discipling, and that would happen on like Sunday nights. We'd have this intentional environment where we had triplets at the time, so we just needed people in our home to help us. So,
No kidding.
um, but it was like, how do we share our life with them? And then a few days later, we would have those people and more at like this midweek meal, and we would study scripture together. And those same people from Sunday were in that space. And then we had planted a church in this little bar, actually. So the college students thought it was fantastic. So we would have that environment on Sundays where those same people from Sunday night, Wednesday night were showing up in those spaces. And we were just trying to do things in the town that was like, where do we not see the kingdom existing? And then how can we see the kingdom like unveiled in that space? So we would like hang out in a nursing home because we said, well, there's no lonely people. People in nursing homes are lonely. Let's be in that space. And there were other stories. So we were also using this language of bless, those that 5 what we call missionary rhythms across like a begin in prayer, listen, eat, serve story. And it was just bare bones. And we were trying to replicate that. How do we see this happening in other homes? And then Rob called and said, "Hey, would you be willing to come to Kansas City and like let's do this together?" So our family, we moved, and within like 2 months, I would say, we had invited about 40 people into this 6 month long learning environment to really take those rhythms of bless and go deep with them. Um, and that was sort of the beginning. There is a backstory that there was this movement of disciple making that had been going on for 6 or 7 years within that faith family there, where our friend Brian Phipps was intentionally seeing, multiplication of generations of people that were growing in character and calling, the gifts of the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit. And there was this rich soil of this is what it means to follow Jesus. This is what it means to like grow in my character and love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. This is what it means to discover how have I been made. It's like 7, 8, 9 generations on multiple strands of disciple making. And the work that we were doing was inviting those people to consider what would it mean to use these missionary rhythms. Still, like, don't let go of that character and calling, but really engage mission outside these 4 walls in a neighborhood. And so over about 18 months, I think we trained somewhere between 150 and 200 people. And we were hearing these amazing stories, like people saying things like, "Hey, my neighbors, told me they're really interested in Jesus and having a meal with me, but they said stop inviting them to our church because we're not going to come. That's word for word. But like that's a neighborhood. But then like another guy that was like, "Hey, I've been prayer walking my office space,
Mm.
and the spiritual climate in this office building has changed. And corporate asked me to come speak like to the national meeting about what's different in our office space. And so I'm going to go talk to like 5,000 people and tell them about the bless rhythms. So like this stuff was happening. I was like, we need to create a training environment that would support these people to see the rhythms of extended family begin to happen, like what we've seen in our own lives, in our own neighborhoods, globally, begin to happen in Kansas City. So we created this year-long training environment that was helping them do a bit of deconstruction and reconstruction, get handholds around disciple-making tools, and then also handholds around extended spiritual family rhythms and multiplication. So that's kind of the backstory. I'll let Rob take it from there.
Yeah, one of the things that I definitely celebrate, like even like when I was back at Granger, we were given permission in space to do experiments. Like there probably been 8 or 9 years of experiments there. Like with Bless, we had created an in and out motion of like breathe and bless, like breathe in listening prayer and breathe out missional prayer. And we had these in and out motions for each one of those, which we had discovered was a major upgrade, for example, in the bless rhythms. It turned it into a rule of life rather than like a checklist that people were doing. So when we started in Kansas City, we had innovations like that already in place that were like an immediate upgrade. And then when we jumped in at Kansas City, there were things, for example, like we had talked with the elders and the staff, like, hey, people that are involved with this, we're asking that they have permission to basically be uninvolved with everything else except for this. Like as long as they're connected with our training cohort, with our coaching, like they don't have to be on a volunteer team. It's okay if they don't come to the weekend services. And there was a secure enough staff and eldership where they were like, yeah, that's great. Which is amazing. That there was that kind of willingness to collaborate and experiment and to create that kind of trusted, open collaboration. And so that created then what eventually became a network of microchurches. It took really about 5 years, I'd say, because there was 2 or 3 years of just on every cycle of those cohorts, we'd raise up new coaches and new trainers. Like we build everything so that everything reproduces at every level, and we build into it like shared facilitation from the jump. So at the end of it, people are like, there aren't any like secret like leader notes or secret moves or whatever. Like, how to do it. You've already been doing it. Like we all can do this, and then like Brian said, at that time, we called it the Simple Church Learning Community. We got, through the first cycle and we felt like it was a failure because we only had like a 30% success rate. And I remember I was debriefing with Ralph Moore and he was like, 30%? That's amazing. I was like, what? He's like, just keep doing 30%, Rob. If you do 30% the next 20 years, you'll have a movement. I was like, oh, I thought we sucked. Okay, great. And he's like, yeah, just keep going, man. Just keep going, And so we're like, I remember coming back with Brian. He's like, Ralph said we're doing great, man. And so we just keep every cycle too. It's like, just keep iterating. What did we learn? What didn't work? How can we make this better? How can we keep iterating? And then basically we got about 5 years in and we had, I don't know, 7, 8 or 9 microchurches, something like that. All at different stages, maybe up to 10 if you kind of, include them all. Like some of them are more embryonic. And it was amazing. Like these are people that, again, no one is collecting Christians, assimilating them into groups and calling them microchurches. These are people who are like out in the harvest and they're making new disciples, and new extended spiritual families are emerging. And that's when we started to have the conversation with Westside. Okay, what happens now? You can do this parallel pathway for 3 to 5 years, and it really doesn't affect anything. Like, it can just go. But at some point, then you have to ask the question, it's basically, are we going to restructure, or are we going to release this?
Mm.
And then it becomes like a prophetic confrontation, and some tough decisions have to be made. Like, are we actually going to restructure now? Do we want to integrate this, incorporate this, let this begin to reboot the whole system? And that's when it gets very costly, and it gets very painful. Or are we going to say, let's let this free and release it? And both are valid options. And so as we had those conversations, we went with the release option. And Westside invested some money into Kansas City Underground when we started. And we were really above board. It's like, hey, this is not going to be a church plant. We are actually going to be a mission agency. We did like 3 information meetings on campus. We told the elders, it's like, hey, we're not pulling, I was one of the primary teachers. Brian was one of the primary worship leaders. It's like, we're not pulling hundreds or 1,000 people out of this mega church. We're going to literally scare people away. We're going to whittle it down. It's going to be a super high bar. And we did. Like, the first information meeting, 10 minutes into it, like, there was hundreds of people at that one. 10 minutes into it, you could see people were uncomfortable. They're looking at their just like, how do I get out of this meeting? No, I don't want to do everything you just talked about. I just like your preaching. I got to get out of here. It was awesome. And we did, after about 3 months of, like, we did the information meetings, we did a bunch of house parties, and we had this final kind of covenant meeting. And we literally ended up with 72 committed disciple makers. It was like a wink from Jesus. So we started with 3 microchurches. So out of the microchurches that emerged, it's funny, most of them wanted to stay with Westside. And I think for them, it was like, it just felt scary to go out into this weird new decentralized thing. They're like, we like the accoutrements, man. And I'm like, I get it. Like, it's awesome to have all the support of the megachurch. Like, and we didn't guilt anyone or shame them. It's like, that's totally great. Like, cool. So it's 3 of the microchurches, and they were the ones that were like Michelle and I's, Brian and Kristen's, and then actually the Barnes, I think, right?
Yeah, the Barnes. There were a couple more that were in the like emerging at the same time. So it was about 5.
Yeah. And then the 72 disciple makers. And even after we'd done all that work, there was still a lot of rumbling in the beginning where they're like, okay, so are you going to put us in microchurches? And we're like, nope. No, we're not. You get to walk the missionary pathway. We'll coach you, and we're going to equip you. We're not putting Christians in groups and calling them microchurches. Like, who are your people, and where's your place? Where's Jesus sent you? And you got to have a partner, at least one other person, or maybe a little team. And the Lord's going to help you become a spiritual mother and father in your context. And we did. We held the line on that. It was one of the wisest things we did. And it was scary too, because it's like, I don't know, hopefully this is going to work, but about month 12 to like 15, all of a sudden it was like, boom, 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 boom. Like, all these microchurches started emerging. So that kind of brings us up to about year 1 of the, and that's when COVID hit. And then when COVID hit, it was like things actually accelerated for us. It was like, we were built for COVID.
Yeah. So do this for me, for people tuning in who maybe just happened upon this podcast or was referred to it by somebody else, and they are hearing the term microchurch, and they're like, what is that? And they're imagining all kinds of things. Help them understand, what is a microchurch?
Tiny, tiny building with a tiny,
The little pastor.
Go ahead.
No. All right. Here's our real definition. Our real definition would be an extended spiritual family. And we like to put a period there. And the reason for that is we want to emphasize identity over activity, people over place. It's about who you are, not what you do. So like I always stop there after extended spiritual family just to emphasize that, beat it till you don't want to hear it anymore. But like the number of times on a Sunday morning in the environments in which I led that we said the church is not a building, the church is a people, and everybody's like, yeah. Um, but then you contrast that with the number of times that you reference the building as the church. We're going to church, we're at church, we had church. Our language betrays what we really believe and informs a mental map about what we think the church is, that it's rooted in a place, a time, and that actually that language works against movement because it captures people's imagination, grounds it in a moment, and it nearly makes it impossible to imagine the church as a people on mission in a context. Um, that's not extended spiritual family is not the holistic definition, but we just like to pause there just as a way to reimagine what it could be. The longer definition is that they're extended spiritual families led by ordinary people that seek to live in everyday reconciling community, and they own the mission of Jesus within a network of relationships. So each part of that matters. The ordinary people, we don't have pastors. We don't use the language actually of pastor. So nobody has a title. The language in the New Testament is about gifting. So there are people that have shepherding gifts. I mean, we can all access that gift within us. Some of us just have a more difficult time doing it. But there's no paid professionals. So every microchurch, the people that lead microchurches all have jobs that aren't paid ministry jobs. The language around they seek to live in everyday reconciling community is about they mourn together, they celebrate together, and they do all of the mundane of life in between together. So people say, what's a microchurch look like? And usually they're asking, what does the Bible study on Tuesday night between 6 and 8 look like? And we go, that's not a microchurch. That's a gathering of the microchurch where they're studying scripture together, which is super important. But in reality, it's a very small component of all of the rhythms that they do. And the reconciling community is about joining Jesus and making the wrong things right again. Uh, it's about the holistic understanding of the restoration of all things, that we each have a little part in restoring that. And then the last piece of own the mission of Jesus and a network of relationships is about, we would say there's only one mission, go make disciples. The church is filling everything in every way. Jesus is going to do that through us. And so every microchurch has the same mission, multiply disciples, but then that becomes contextualized in their context, whether that's a geographic neighborhood, whether that's a network of relationships like the houseless people, adults with disabilities, formerly incarcerated, whatever that is.
Mm.
Their mission is to multiply disciples contextualized within that network of people. Um, so it's like there's no simple way to answer it except to say, well, they're extended spiritual families. What do families look like? Imagine that informed by Jesus. The rest of it matters, but it usually takes a while to grasp those first few words before you need to dig into all the rest of that.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons we don't use the language church planting, because it's very intimidating to people. As soon as you say church plant, and ordinary folks typically go, well, there's got to be a professional preacher, and then we got to find a building somewhere, and I guess then we have to have a band, and then there's going to be children's ministry, and it's going to cost a lot of money, and it comes with it's like a suitcase that you open up, and it has so many things inside of it. And then it's connected to kind of this whole almost like industrial complex of like very complex expectations, and it's okay to use that language for other people, but for us that's problematic.
Yeah.
And most of the church planting around the world actually doesn't look like that. And the church planting in the Bible doesn't look like that. So we feel like for the future of church planting in North America, um, we really need to think about when we're using that language, and it's okay. But increasingly, it is problematic. Like the future of church planting in North America, if we want to actually see it scale and multiply, what we're talking about here today, this needs to increase dramatically, because it will actually mobilize the priesthood of all believers. It gets so many more people into the game. You know how much it costs to start? Nothing.
Yeah.
$0 to start. It costs you your life,
Yeah.
your time, your energy, your food budget goes up, like things like that. But like, you don't have to go get like 200 people. You don't have to get a launch team. You don't need $250,000. Like, this is a significant part of the future of quote unquote church planting in North America. It has to be.
Yeah.
If we're going to actually get to the 16% mission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think we're seeing a generation coming up underneath all of us, or I would say generations coming up that that are well suited for this moment and well suited for what it seems is trying to become a real legit movement in the United States. Not just one that's kind of heard of here and there, something that's not the normative. When we first started building our relationship and I started getting to know you guys, it's been what, probably about 5 years now. And I had heard of house churches, had never really wrapped my mind around the reasoning behind it, all the things that you were talking about, the deep dive into the whys, or the whys that that any church existed for that matter. And so the last 5 years has been a lot of great personal work of looking into what it means to live as the church, and for me personally, and then us as an organization, how we come alongside everyday believers to be the church in their own neighborhoods. And so I just think that that we're going to see what has begun as a movement that now is becoming more of a normative term that people are hearing, and I think a better understanding, at least in leaders across the United States. They're starting to understand and grasping what a microchurch is and why it exists. But I think we're going to see a younger generation who take hold of it and spread it like wildfire. And I'm excited about that because everyone can play. I mean, I have a
Amen.
20-year-old and an 18-year-old daughter. My 18-year-old daughter, when she was 16, we began the conversation, not began, but we were having a conversation about what she wanted to do with her life. And we're driving down the road in the car. I'll never forget it. She turned to me and said, "Mom, I want to plant a church."
Mhm.
And I thought, I tried not, it was one of those moments of like, do you know what that means? And, like, you're giving up your life. And, I'm so proud of you and all the things all at once. But you fast forward, she's 18 now. And, uh, what you guys are doing is what she oozes in her everyday life. And so I'm just excited, and I just appreciate you guys taking what would seem like a risk to try all kinds of new things, and the churches that supported you along the way to try those new things that aren't actually new, they're actually ancient, and
Wait.
just yeah,
Yeah.
just breathing
Yes,
new life.
It really is. I'm always like, it's really not new. It's like
Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
it's
so
the
yeah,
OG,
It
actually.
depends on how far back you go.
there's
Yeah.
nothing new under the sun. Let's
I would,
back to that. Yeah.
what you're saying too, just with the younger generations, just to double click on that, I would say that two of the brightest spots in our network would be Awaken and Zero Hour. Awaken working with 20 somethings and Zero Hour working with high school students. The way that Zero Hours contextualize the mission is when we say we want to see Kansas City filled with the beauty, justice, and good news of Jesus, they would say we want to see the gospel flourish in every high school in Kansas City. So that's 88 high schools. They've been at it like 3 years, and they have microchurches on 16 campuses.
Hmm.
And so, um, like they hold that line of multiplication, and they work with students that want to make disciples, and they just elevate that language over and over and over again. They've trained hundreds, literally, of students in these disciple making practices, principles. And they continue to coach. I think there are over 100 students now that they're doing ongoing coaching with. They're forming, they don't use the term microchurch because it's problematic on high school campuses. So they just use the term teams.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
But
great.
Yeah,
they're
I want to make sure that people caught what you just talked about because Zero Hour is somebody that we kind of fangirl over a little bit. And they were part of our ventures, Next Ventures Shark Tank deal. So yeah, thankful for you guys introducing us to Corey and his team. But what you're talking about is a movement of churches on high school campuses started by high schoolers for high schoolers who are now discipling their peers in a high school environment. Those are the kind of things I think that people dream of, and they don't know how to break it down in such a way to allow movement to actually happen. Because we tend to put these guardrails around everything to think everything's got to be just perfect or just the way that I perceive things to need to be, instead of allowing people to authentically lead out of who God's created them to be and disciple others in the spaces He's placed them.
Yeah,
Um,
and again, all of those teams have adult Sherpas, so they're not, people get concerned about heresy, and we care about that too. That's why they have adult mentors and coaches that, and you should see the way that they track their stories and
yeah,
track the data and track the spiritual steps that they're. It's amazing.
yeah,
mhm.
Never seen any youth ministry that has the oversight and the care and the intentionality that Zero Hour has.
Yeah,
mhm,
We're a decentralized network.
I love
yeah,
it. I love
And
it.
I really, if you're listening today and you have a passion for teenagers, please check out Zero Hour Ministries.
mhm.
It's worth going down the rabbit hole. They have their own podcast too. Check it out.
I appreciate you guys sharing your kind of your origin story, your second conversion stories. Because I do think that's significant. I literally got a call one day that said, "Hey, we studied Francis Chan's model, we studied Soma's model. We want to come to Tampa and study the Tampa Underground's model." And you realize, like, I can't help you at all, because they aren't models that you just pick and choose from. And so I appreciate you guys sharing kind of your conversion story, and that's really what I'm excited about for the church in the West is I'm seeing that with vocational pastors that are coming. We sometimes we talk about a level 4 conversion, moving from a level 3 mindset to level 4, but um, yeah, there is this angst. And again, one of the things I love about working with Exponential is, we champion every expression of the bride of Christ, and God's using it. But we also need to not be limited. We need to not start with a form of ecclesiology. We need to understand some things more fundamentally, I think, and what you guys have done here, what you've said here. And yeah, if you're a vocational pastor and there's some angst about what you're doing, yeah, I would go back and listen to the beginning of this again and just, yeah, search your own heart for what God's asking you to do. But yeah, grateful for you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's been a,
So let's do this. If we have people listening who are like, man, I'd really love to check out what these guys are doing or what they're talking about. How can they do that? What's the best way for them to connect with you guys, learn from you, even just kind of take a look a little bit under the hood a little?
two places. One is just go to kansascityunderground.org.
KCunderground.org.
Yeah, KCUnderground, sorry, .org. And we do have some regular opportunities where people can jump in. And one of them is we have occasionally an intensive where people can actually come and spend a day and a half with us to do training in person. There are occasional training huddles online where folks can also jump in. And then Brian and I have a Substack that we tag team, which is starfishu.substack.com. And we post there very regularly, at least once or twice a week. And it's basically all things disciple making, decentralized leadership in the style of Jesus, microchurch, what it means to be a servant equiper. Those are two great spots. And then there's also a podcast that the Kansas City Underground hosts, and Zero Hour has a podcast as well. Anything else, Brian?
Yeah, I was going to say the Casey Underground podcast, caseyunderground.org/toolkit would be the one spot that is probably the most practical, if you will. So there are tools centered around our disciple maker pathway and what we see emerging in global movements of how you journey from, I'm going to begin with prayer into seeing disciples made, churches emerge, and multiplication. We try to keep that updated with new tools as we develop those. And those are like, again, we we generate content in the sense of, hey, these are tools that have helped to make disciple makers effective. We also learn so much from the global South and try to take as much as possible and go, hey, here's what we're seeing them do. How do we do that in the West? Here's our version of that. And all of those are kind of grouped in the different phases that you would journey through from, beginning to multiplication.
So good. And I'll also say that these guys have written a couple of ebooks with us that are free. You can just go on the Exponential website and search Microchurch, and you'll find their names on all kinds of things from articles to a podcast series. But the ebooks that they have come out with takes some of this information and puts it into one place. And I think we have, is it two or three?
There's
I
two
think
of them:
two books.
Extraordinary Prayer
Yes.
and then Deeply Rooted.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll say those books continue to be one of our number one rated books that people have been engaging with, and so um, yeah, they're completely free for everybody, and so we encourage you guys to download those and read those too.
We can put links to all of that, everything they've mentioned in those books, we can put in the show notes.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, we'll do that so for ease of access. And is there anything else you guys want to say to those listening before we wrap up?
I would just remind you, everyone who's listening, again, you don't need permission. You already have it from Jesus. If you've been waiting for a sign, this is it. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And Jesus is just looking for ordinary people, butchers and bakers and candlestick makers, and that's us. Start small. Pray for those that are nearest to you. Open your table. Ask good questions. Start spiritual questions. Start spiritual conversations and plant the seeds. And Jesus is already at work. You can join him.
Yeah. Yeah, I would double down on all of that. The only other thing I think that is coming to mind is just John 15. This is where it begins. Um, Anything that we've said, we just continually just return to that, just abide. We don't produce fruit. It's not up to us. The curiosity and having teammates and just continuing to return to that space of when we abide, the overflow is all of these other things. And the invitation is like straight from Jesus, just abide in me and you'll bear much fruit because the Father will do this in and through us.
And how liberating is that? Um,
Yeah.
Anybody who's been in any type of vocational ministry longs for that kind of liberation and freedom to, day to day, to just freely abide and really truly recognizing that we don't grow fruit. That's not our job. We plant seeds, we water, we do all the things, but we can't grow a single stinking thing. And um, I think it's just beautiful and liberating. And I love what you guys are doing. I appreciate your leadership and the fact that you approach everything with a humble servant posture in all that you do. And yeah, thanks for being with us for this episode. And we hope that you enjoyed it. This 7-part series that we're doing featuring guys like Rob and Brian, just normal folks who heard Jesus start something a little different, a little off the beaten path, or uh, instead of getting rid of the box or thinking outside of the box, trying to use the box and all kinds of creative things. And so God is a God of creativity, and there is not a one size fits all. There is not a silver bullet approach.
That's right.
There is the gospel, and there are people, and there's our yes, and that, so I just
Yeah.
encourage you to give your best yes and tune in for our next episode. Thanks for listening.